Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. The show where we navigate the strange journey that albums take us on. We experience them and then try to articulate them into these very videos. So in today's episode, we're reviewing something that I have been listening to a lot recently. A very miserable, doomy, and depressingly bleak album that pieces together every single part of all the heavy genres to create something very loud and sonically captivating. An incredibly weird project, one that has actually been described by some people as gloom gaze. Very interesting, name that I've never come across before until looking into this guy. But yes, essentially though, when it comes to this artist, the more I've been hearing and the more I've been reading about it, the more I just feel in awe of the very thing I'm experiencing here. As mentioned, it's definitely one of my favourite things I've been listening to recently, something I've just been having on repeat constantly over and over and over. Is that a good thing? Who knows? So, yeah, let's get on with it. Today, I present Below the House by Planning for Burial. So of course, who is Planning for Burial? Well, this is the moniker for one Tom Wasluck, a project helmed entirely by himself as an outlet for, as what I mentioned, some categorise as gloom gaze. So Wasluck is a one-man show, playing absolutely everything in his home recordings and in his live shows, often giving us this very metal-infused dirge of pure stunning catharsis. But it's not just heavy music. The music also navigates so many different genres, becoming very slow and ambient at times. But it's all just this stunning presentation of something deeply personal to Wasluck. It's a little bit odd because for me, listening to Planning for Burial, I get so many vibes from the kinds of so many different bands that I already like, and I imagine this is actually the same for so many people who like Planning for Burial. For myself, I kept getting the kind of vibes I first experienced when I heard the likes of Low and Have a Nice Life for the very first time, for example. When first hearing those artists, it was like experiencing something monumental and something incredibly bleak and depressing. And listening to Planning for Burial kicked up so many of those same strange familiar feelings. It's weird because it's sad and it's bleak, but it's just something I seem to really respond to, hence why I've gotten really into this. And it's, as I mentioned, it's something I've been listening to constantly on repeat for the past few days. It's something that I just find very comforting in a time when I'm just feeling very antsy and anxious. So, what is Below the House then? Well, this is what I think is meant to be the fourth official studio album release of Planning for Burial, released on the Flenser in 2017 as its 75th official release. And this album is just an incredible expression of bleak lethargy, immense heaviness and depression, all expressed across a sound palette straddling so many lines between the many facets of metal music, before finding place for the likes of shoegaze, post-rock and even ambient at times. One of the things that just amazes me about Wasluck's music is his ability to tap into that incredibly broken, relatable self, and expressing his understanding of that, through music that covered so much ground, actually. So many different genres that are all contributing to the same story. Truly phenomenal, new favourite of mine, so let's dive into it all. So, Below the House opens up with Whiskey and Wine, and we have immediate distortion here, feedback and static, crying out in agony, as it all just rattles in your head until there's such a sudden descent into this very heavy, doomy riff. You get slow monolithic drums, agonising distortion and fuzz, filling up the headphone with something that feels so monumentally gargantuan, you know? It's almost like, to me, perhaps like, you know, the thrashier side you get from Have a Nice Life, perhaps. It's really indulging that immense heaviness with all that distorted instruments offer against that slow monolithic drum beat. And it plays on so nicely until the synths add this shimmering effect over the top of it all, just droning us away as the instrumentals just sound completely destroyed by the weight of that distortion. It's fascinating. And what you then get, though, is Wozluck suddenly doing this incredibly, like, strangled, screaming black metal vocal style, shrieking against the top of all this fuzz and chaos, desperate, you know, to express itself, but barely able to climb out of the growing miasma's dense amplifier noise here. It's weird because it all feels so broken and so fractured, you know, and it's all roughly strewn in amongst each other, and almost like paint that's just been roughly thrown across the canvas with no care, really. And it's such a heavy, you know, sense of distorted song that sounds so dense and bleak, you know, just expressing the agony of existence, of pure existentialism it feels, you know. Especially when the guitars, you know, as they play those riffs, you know, they suddenly throw these brief pulses of pure feedback, though, just that screech of it before coming right back in, breaking up the song, you know, with this kind of weird staggered approach that's constantly ready to crumble under its own weight, it feels. Very peculiar, but I remember when first hearing this, just feeling crushed under the weight of it all, of that dreadful existentialism being expressed in the music. And what's fascinating is how lyrically, Wozluck paints such strange, unusual images with very few words, though. Oddly enough, this reminds me of, you know, the kind of things that I enjoy about the band Logo, you know, who on a lot of their songs have rather few words, and yet those few words paint up these very vivid images in your head. And so even with these seemingly few resources, you know, from instrumentals to even the words, the whole image of this song comes across clearly of this very bleak, miserable experience of suffering, of longing, of heartaches, and especially as well when, like, it just all results in something that's so cathartic to experience, you know, before it all just builds up to this finale where you get these really gentle chimes, pianos and bells over this ambient outro that actually feels oddly warm and delightful after experiencing the heaviness of everything that preceded it. It's almost like a faint glimmer of hope as you consider such sad levels of depression almost. And interesting, with how so few words, it still expresses the sentiment of Wozluck carrying the entire weight of the world on his shoulders. Oddly reminiscent of the vibes I get when I first listened to Have a Nice Life, actually, you know, bleak existential songs but pushed through this heavy metal lens, perhaps, you know, very fascinating, and I think a truly beautiful, wonderful way to open up this album. And so next we get Threadbare. And so those drones continue in from the last song until a drum introduces a very odd little pattern, perhaps, you know, punctuated by the strikes of the cymbals and eventually on the snare itself as well, you know, where alongside it, you know, you've got this always clicking from the guitars and the bass, establishing a very sort of unsettling atmosphere here. You know, it just paves the way for Wozluck to then whisper these very slow chorus styled vocals, faint whispers of misery against those grey instrumentals. And I adore the atmosphere the whole thing is starting to establish here. It is, you know, as it starts to, you know, build upon these different loops in amongst itself, letting Wozluck just twang away on the guitar with this really nice effect that he puts on it as well through his pedals, perhaps, you know. And the presence of it all, you know, from the drums, especially on this one, this has the whole thing pushing the whole atmosphere across so slowly, in a way that is so sad and melancholy and just so moody, perhaps, you know. But like, it's interesting how it all sounds, and the way that Wozniak uses his voice in a very different way on this one, you know? On the last track, you had that black metal shrieking and screaming, and here, you've got this very indiscernible mumbling instead. No, but as he does sing, he just lets the guitar do these very strange things, you know, creating certain emphasis after certain repetitions, before a singular distortion just throws it into something bigger and denser, you know, very unusual. And the building of the sonic palette across these songs, it amazes me. I'm just in awe of it every time I hear it, though, because it's just, something that's constantly building up and up, it feels, you know. But as well, like, being the second song, it suggests at this point there's going to be a lot of variation across the whole album. You know, some songs being distorted and heavy, others being slow and minimalist almost. And I think this is perhaps one of my favourite tracks, as I just found myself carried by the weight of emotion that comes across in the music here, especially as well when once again we look at those words, those minimal number of words, and see Wozniak experiencing this rather bleak imagery of memories that continues to persist that are also slowly fading. An odd level existentialism that just feels oddly abstract, with its very few words once more. And it's strange as he sort of mumbly sings this thing though. It's fascinating how he just slowly pulls every word across the length of the song though, further obfuscating the image as the words become strangely stretched across the many bars that are being played here. And yet the vibe is something oddly disturbing and existential, perhaps, for me, I imagine those strange hours of the early morning, half asleep, half awake, perhaps, waking up in the middle of a night terror, perhaps, and seeing those strange images of people from so long ago in our lives, or just perhaps, just those images from the shadows, perhaps, you think of it all, but it's existentially just ticking away and becoming lost and faded. It's fascinating, and I think it just builds up to this strange outro as well, though, where everything overloads and overwhelms, but you get this piano that plays along the top of it all, though. And, it kind of gives, it's the most tumultuous point of the entire song, and with that piano playing these very, light, sparse notes, almost atonally, perhaps, it's like it can barely stand up against, the sudden chaotic and distorted outro that suddenly, just ends this song, It just expresses like this overwhelming sense of existentialism, perhaps, of horror and disaster that's coming through everything we're experiencing. And man, I just think it's another brilliant track here. But moving along, we get to one of my favourites again, Somewhere in the Evening. And so this one just opens up with pure distortion, just fuzz, metal, riffs, the drums just militantly pushing along as you get the guitars just falling into fascinating levels of pure feedback and distortion here. And like, as manic as everything's becoming, it's all just building and overloading and loading. It's all just falling right back into line. And thus you just get this agonising, dense metal that's so heavy and overwhelming. But it's fascinating, you get this very long intro that just stuns and zaps you before the vocals come in a very weird way, as you kind of get a dual vocal take, one that's very miserable and monotonous, droning away though with these very weird intonations of the words, whilst the other shrieks with that black metal aesthetic once again. And I think it's amazing how it all just contrasts each other though, two different spectrums of vocal takes though, resulting in a song that's so heavy and intense and so overwhelming with this depressing level of misery it feels. It's so loud and heavy and, as deep, as that distortion and chaos goes, it just all just results in something that's so like loud and phenomenal. To be fair, as the song all progresses, though, you kind of get these big, heavier descents following vocal takes or into the choruses and things like that, or what would be the chorus sections of it. But towards the end, though, all of that chaos and manicness, it all just seems to crumble away to reveal this piano playing in amongst that chaos. And it's so sad and heavy, as, it just, you get this perfect fading of pure black metal right into this singular recording of piano that takes over it all, letting everything just fade into silence, and the whole emotions that have been brought up here just all fall right back very slowly. Like, my goodness, it's one of the most brilliant things I've heard. I don't know why, but I truly adore this song. And one thing I found out when looking about it, this song, is one of the few songs to feature a collaboration on it of sorts. There is a recording of Tom's father's circular saw as noise, which his father was unaware of Tom recording him. And so, like, weird bit of a tangent here, but when I first saw the credit, my eyes immediately went to the word saw, and I just imagined that kind of Neutral Hotel singing saw type thing. But no, this is a circular saw. This is an electric saw that would be in somebody's shed, I would assume. The mechanized blade turning around with that terrible whirring effect. Like, is this some kind of Tony Conrad, Jim O'Rourke weed whacker shit? Maybe, perhaps, but using it as a noise layer results in something so sonically fascinating in this track. Like, this crazy level of heaviness that, just plays pure noise, it feels. And it's a cool thing to have on this album, and a very cool thing to have on this track, though. Like, it just all results in something that's so overwhelming, and man, it just gets to me. But yeah, I do think with the way this track navigates its spectrum of sounds and the way he performs and sings it, it's just one of my favourite things I've heard on this album. And even though it's so heavy and overwhelming, it just captures such strange levels of existentialism for me, and man, I just can't get enough of this one. Our next track, though, The Warmth of You. So another favourite of mine. It's weird. I think they all might just be favourites in their own weird way. But this one, you kind of get a bounce of bass that starts it all off. It's kind of just like this very simple little sort of chuggy, dirgy style. It's set against some light drones before the guitars come in with a single glide. It feels, and this one, its palette kind of comes across as very tragic and emo almost, kind of a sense of it all just rising up and building up and up, where you then get, this brief phrase of distant memories of a person from their past, and missing this person we can no longer be with, where we can't feel the warmth of their bodies against ours anymore, and just how horrible that is for our person to experience. But what Wozlock does is he lets that build up, with this repetition of, the single phrase of I tried, and then suddenly it all just descends on a single, note of feedback into this proper headbanging dirge it feels for the rest of the song. And I don't know why but I just adore how heavy and dense this is, and it reminds me of those headbanging moments from the likes of Have a Nice Life, which comes up a lot in this review, of course. It is what it is. But like, for some reason, it's just another one of my favourite things. Like, I'm just so down with how heavy and sad the whole thing sounds. And just this very dense, heavy metal music, full of noise, full of distortion, and like, it's so good because like, the structuring as well. You get that first set of lines, you get that riff, then you get a second set of lines from Waslug. But it feels like after this one, he's able to send it even further down into like, depressing levels of noise by just adding in more layers onto the loops and stuff. And man, it's something I've been listening to so much recently. Like, I do wonder why, but yeah, another cool one off the album, of course, isn't it? So from here, we move on to Past Lives. Now, this is where things get very interesting, I feel. A rather ambient song from Waslug, just drones and guitar layers coming in very slowly with many unusual effects, it feels, almost caught in these sort of like delays and loops and cassette loops, perhaps, before you kind of get this oddly lowercase tap occurring, the faint sonic vibration of distant guitar and synth lines, perhaps, and, for me, especially with the way you kind of got that sort of cajunking sound, like it's hard to describe, but whatever's doing that, I'm reminded so much of the sensation of being on the train. That rattle of odd lowercase thunks just occurring, alongside that length band music. It just occurs with such a tempo that reminds you of just being on the motion of a train, perhaps. But yeah, I think it's a very charming little composition to have here, though. A very gentle little ambient drone to help break up this really heavy album we're experiencing. And I like how what this one seems to do is do this very odd thing of capturing this little place in time of wherever you currently are, where you are listening to this album, perhaps. And for me, as I was writing these very words, I was on the train, of course, wasn't I? Which is perhaps why I kind of felt captured, by the very sensation of it all, though, why I felt like it, why I felt like it was reminding me of the train, because I was just just given the image of where I currently was, if that makes sense, of just being lost in time in your own thoughts and stuff. But I just love how this instrumental does it, though. Like, it's a weird one to try explain properly. I don't know if I've done any justice, but I do adore what this track does as a result of just being, well, the way it is, essentially. Speaking of instrumental tracks, so we do have another one with the next track of Something, in parentheses here. So this one kind of, you get a weird deluge of feedback, perhaps bordering back towards ambient or even just electronic music though, especially with how slow and subtly the drones just rise out of the darkness perhaps. And it's another cool one that slowly evolves out of the silence to create this small little moment of just something occurring though. And perhaps with how the last track threw itself towards a nothingness, perhaps, of just the nothingness of the mundanity of life, this one, it seems to go into the opposite direction of throwing it all towards something, as suggested by the track name here. And it's another strange moment, because with the way the sonic palette sounds here, it kind of just sounds like Nintendo for some reason, capturing some video game aesthetic, perhaps, like pause music, or even, just not even playing the video game, but just letting the soundtrack run ad nauseum, perhaps, off your little Game Boy, perhaps. A capture of a single moment in time on the game, perhaps. Like, I don't know, it's another very weirdly abstract one for me. But I adore the sonic palette again, though. And the very cool things that Wozluck does with his music, the way he makes all of his instruments sound and what he puts it all together here. Like, it's a very cool moment on the album, something that does continue the sort of sad existential nature the whole album is slowly capturing. Of course, it's a little bit hard to talk about, but I think that's interesting, because there's a lot of very strange elements off of this album, and some of it is a little bit stranger than others, but I think it's amazing how it all still contributes to this overall story and expression of this story that is just weirdly relatable in a weird way, despite being very abstract. Let's get back to it though. The next track of Dull Knife Part 1. So, back to distortion, back to fuzz, filling up the right earphone, it feels, with everything until it all descends heavily into just the whole spectrum of hearing on the headphones, And this one, you're kind of getting a slow, dirty riff, that's got so much noise, so much distortion, this weird looping of drums and bass here. And you just get kind of another heavy headbanger though. Another dirge of a song that calls back to the kind of metal-y styles of the earlier tracks. Something, that feels a little bit weird, because like after navigating those kind of ambient layers in the previous two tracks, we're now thrown back into the metal side of things rather suddenly. But I think it's very cool how that sonically occurs though. Just these dense metal layers that suddenly smash into their headphones without any, warning and stuff. It just suddenly occurs and you're like, "Ooh, goodness," just experiencing it all once again. But like, it's very cool because in this one, Wozluck just lets it all build up so nicely. It adds new effects into the mix the more this one goes on. A further push of the sad existential star once again, that's just full of distortion, chaos, and feedback. But as the all progresses, though, it eventually all starts to fade away into, just bringing up the volume all the way back down, until all of that noise and all of that distortion sort of fades into this very ambient guitar once again, completely caught on clean delays and reverb effect, it feels, capturing, that density that the track was offering, and throwing it all towards something stranger that's transformed into something entirely different. As though the composition has just moved before our very eyes from what was incredibly dense and heavy to just that other end of guitar playing of everything being soft and ambient. And it's fascinating to me, because it's kind of like gone from that regimented structure of noise, the very strict structure that those drums offer, if that makes sense, the bars and stuff like that, and instead goes into that freeform abstract nature of ambient music, that other end of guitar playing, I feel like. I don't know how intentional it is. Probably, of course, but I just think it's really neat how Wozniak does it though in his music. And I have to say, it is the kind of thing that I like in bands and acts and artists that make heavy music, though, of them going toward the other side of the spectrum and making softer music when composing their songs. Like, it allows the music to straddle the two stages, these two different stages of music, it feels, of soft music and hard music, showing this versatility in the kind of stuff you're creating in terms of your sound palette. And in the result of Planning for Burial, balancing, existential examinations of self-dread over the top of all of that. Really fascinating to me. Getting back to the music, though, it just glides right into the next track of Dull Knife Part 2. And so the longest track on the album at 11 minutes, from the strange place that that ambient layer had occurred from, it in comes this kind of almost acoustic riff to bring it right back to that rigid structure of traditional songwriting once again, And this one has a very strange existential musing of just being nothing, of being formless, a fog above the houses, it feels. And it establishes something so sad and melancholy of just being lost within the spaces between time itself, it feels. A strange ambient sound palette and minimal drones, guitars all building up, and from it, you do get kind of a strange frequency that emerges from time to time across the length of this mix, It's kind of like it's threatening to pull it all back into pure distortion again. But instead, it brings it right back to that acoustic guitar riff again, that clean guitar. And it all results in this really sad pendulum effect that occurs, almost like the final ounces of energy left, just lying there, overwhelmed, barely able to move perhaps, existentially wandering on and on, it feels. And these themes of longing, of holding on to these times in life perhaps, is repeated in that refrain of calling me back home. For me, it's just like being pulled into those moments in time perhaps that exist within your memory, the existential dread of memories, that feeling of foreverness, of longing, and the despair that comes with it as well perhaps, But like, as sad as it all is, the song does this really beautiful thing though, when alongside Waslock's own voice, it suddenly becomes a multitude of different voices all coming in to sing the outro alongside with it. Like, it's interesting to consider, after playing the entire album solo essentially, apart from the circular saw of course, but essentially after playing everything by himself, we suddenly have this chorus of individuals all coming in to sing the very same refrain and express this very vision aesthetic of the album. And who is on it? Well, a lovely list of different people actually, of the following actually. We get Daniel Barrett, Tim McCougar, James Milunas, Christina Esferandi, Pope Joan II, Steve Ortega, Erin Cornelius, Kai Bates, Abram, Bethany Carter, Nick Williams, and Jason Combs. And so, yeah, after mentioning so many times just these little references to Have a Nice Life, here they are. Here they are, quietly singing this song with Tom Waslock alongside this, wonderful group of other people, who many of which I don't know who they are. Some I definitely should be checking out, right? But like, to get back to it, like, it's just so beautiful and just so existentially like tragic in a beautiful way, because it's like one of the few moments on this album where Waslock is joined by other people. Like, you still get this sense of isolation and loneliness in what's being said, but there's less isolation and loneliness because everybody else is all singing towards it though. Like, for me, it's kind of like a little bringing of like-minded individuals all singing the same refrain over and over, all singing along to this outro and letting it all build up to this final point atop the mountain that has the whole song been building up towards. Like, for me, a kind of image I get though, like, especially with how so much of the album presents itself, I can't just imagine Waslock, isolated and alone, playing his guitar to himself, singing his refrain and feeling isolated and alone at that time. But when the voices come through, it kind of feels like these faint little images of other people experiencing the very same thing in their isolated place and time. And it just kind of gives you the sense of not being alone in these feelings that, so many of us have been here before, so many of us have felt these things. And although, your suffering makes you feel so broken and alone, we're not alone. When we think about it, there are others out there who connect and understand to these very same existential feelings. Like, it's so fascinating, I find. Like, it's just one of my favourite things of this album, and it just gets to me in such an emotional way. And I think it's a truly beautiful song, and such a beautiful point to build up to across the length of the album. But it's nice though, from all this though, the song continues to build and build though. Like, it kind of find time to build it further and further into this extended outro of drones, drums, and a suddenly appearing piano that's almost atonal, almost striking against the very music itself, as you get a swell of noise and drones building up like a growing storm. This final, point top of the mountain, essentially, at the end of the album. For me, it's almost like this final moment of tragically occurring music. Just found at the end of here, like, after everything we've built up, the music is still tragic and sad and depressing. It's weird as well, because the rising drones become very interesting as they sort of come in and out of the mix, and it's almost like, once again, it's threatening to throw it all back into distortion and chaos though. But still, this phenomenal moment of togetherness, all musing on that tragic expression, that we can all connect to, the things in our memories that pull us back to the places we call home, perhaps. Like, I love it. I think it's so nice how the album has navigated this story through each and every song, through every heavy moment of bliss to gorgeous moments of pure ambience. And like the way Wasluck has put his music together, weaving together this, this story, and this music that sounds like this, essentially, like strange, loud, moody, existential music that's perfectly listened to when you're feeling isolated and alone, perhaps. Just wanting to listen to something sad, full of distortion, full of fuss, just full of this untethered anger and disappointment over the human condition and experiencing emotions. Like, I do get it. It's not for everyone. Like, some people don't respond to it that much. And I think maybe it might be because I respond to it so well, or so much, because it's just an album that does all the things I want to hear in an album that's like this, It's kind of like, for me, a bleaker version of the kind of things that I would listen to as a kid, I would listen to all sorts of different kinds of music, gentle music, soft music, loud music and stuff. And it's like, Wasluck has combined it all into this one experience. And I'm just, it just reminds me of so many different things. Bands who would just, for example, just turn up their instruments and play, such loud, empathetic metal music. Like, I can identify with that. And for me, I can really also identify with the tragic sense of existentialism that's embedded across the album, sketched across these small instances of phrases, small paragraphs, but also, or even single sentences, but also etched into the very music itself and how it all sounds and come across. Like, it's the kind of thing I just enjoy listening to. I love hearing music that comes across this way. It's like, it's weird because like the words have that kind of catharticism with the likes of Low, and then the music navigates so many different things from black metal to emo to ambient to post-rock. Like, it's all just the things I like, and I love hearing it all come together in this weird harmonious way. Truly amazing. However, we do have one final track, Below the House. So this one kind of opens with field recordings of like cars passing by, and then a very prominent bass suddenly comes, up against this very sort of slow Nine Inch Nails vibe. A final epilogue, perhaps, of a final existential music. Everything sounding just as broken, full of despair, and that the rest of the album has been presenting to us. It's weird because this one is so creepy and foreboding though, like it just ends everything on a downer, a sobering reminder of the reality around us and how after experiencing hope, we still have to face the music, face the darkness, still experience what we cannot shake from ourselves. And it's sonically interesting because after the brilliant long burner of Dawn Night 2, this one kind of gives me that sense of, the final credits, or even a post-credits scene that perhaps suggests that there's more to the story than what we've heard. The story of human existence that will continue to go on, and the result, what will that bring with it? Who knows? Just more of the same, of thinking back to those dark, foreboding times, the essential themes of the album. And it all being just this final reflection before ending on this final ambient deluge to close off the whole thing. Like, my goodness, one of my, I don't know, I find it so difficult to really properly put into words how it all makes me feel, but this whole album just hits me like a ton of bricks, listening to Planning for Burial for some reason, it's resulted in me finding something incredibly cathartic during a time when I've just been feeling incredibly anxious and a bit miserable, perhaps, kind of sad about a bunch of things, such as navigating through life, just maneuvering through these emotions and times. Because I can remember many different times in my life when I've kind of honed in on something when I first heard it, something that has just instantly clicked and, kicked up, the same kind of feelings and sensations I had when listening to similar music as a young kid. And it's, I kind of have this intense feeling of reminiscing on the old times, when I listen to this, like listen to all sorts of different kinds of music to help navigate those situations, and for me, at this particular time, Below the House by Planning for Burial has just hit that sweet spot for something that maybe I kind of need in my life at the moment. Like, I think for some people, they're going to think that's very weird, because for them, listening to this doesn't mean anything, it's just kind of weird, cheesy music perhaps. But like, all music is kind of weird in that respect, and we all like different things, and for some reason, I'm really down with the kind of things that Planning for Burial does with his music, and I'm glad to now be a new fan. Something noisy that kind of, scratches the same itch of so many bands I kind of do, like as mentioned, the same kind of things I felt when I first listened to the likes of Low or Have a Nice Life, but then also the same kind of things I felt when I first heard Death Haven or Ulver or even Hellish Forum actually, even at times reminded of the same level of catharsis I felt when first hearing Linkin Park, for example. Like, it's weird how it kind of covers the spectrum of so many different things that you as an individual have heard, like, I don't know, but it's interesting because, I think it results in this because of how far Tom pushes the instrumental palette across the, of course, of the album. So many different instruments he's playing and performing, and as a result, so many different vibes, so many different genres that comes across. And yeah, it's actually just worth probably going through the credits on this one. We didn't really go through the Bandcamp notes. We briefly mentioned it, but yeah, it's worth mentioning the Bandcamp because it does tell us the instruments that Tom played for this though. Planning for Burial were made of flesh and bone, amplifiers, microphones, machines, uncertainty, analog and digital synthesizers, electric and acoustic guitars, 6-string bass, tape loops, piano, glockenspiel, drums, organs, various delay and reverb units. Circular Saw on Somewhere in the Evening, unknowingly played by my father. Voice on Past Lives by a Ghost. So, essentially, a full rundown of everything put into this recording. And it kind of makes sense, because it kind of reminds me of that sort of Have a Nice Life setup of home instruments, recording a wide variety of parts to build up a sonic image. Something that blends together acoustic and electric instrumentals and kind of straddles the lines between folk and doom perhaps, and so on and so forth. But like, I love how he included this kind of vague reference to his own state of mind when recording the album. Uncertainty. Just the way... the torment your mind undergoes when you try to compose music, try to express yourself in a way that feels true to yourself, perhaps. And, it makes sense with how uncertain, how nervous and full of anxiety, and how that so much of this music endures, perhaps. But in spite of all the negativity experienced, the instrumentals created in these cathartic albums that, weird people like myself can just listen to relate to, getting lost in this kind of music, just results in something truly amazing, I feel. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. It's still just straddles so much, it's interesting for me, it's kind of got that home recording style kind of vibe, but I'm actually reminded kind of like the likes of 9 Inch Nails a lot, I'm kind of getting this image of like if Trent Reznor perhaps recorded everything on home recordings, rather than it with a proper studio setup, just essentially just making music to endure the times. It's what comes across in so many different bands I like in this ilk though, but it's what I really love about Planning for Burial. Music to navigate your journey through life, and whether playing below the house or playing in the basement perhaps, sonically overindulging in this delusion metal and this experimental branch of ambience and sound design. It's just a perfect little album for me. So yeah, this review's gone a bit longer than it should do, but we're finishing up though. But you can see I clearly like this one, can't you? Like, for me, it all just captures the sadness of the the sadness of human existence, it feels, and it makes me wonder what story Tom is navigating over the course of making this album, though. Like, it all just feels so overwhelmingly sad and too much to bear. And I remember when first hearing it, it just felt like an album was representing the sense of carrying the weight of the entire world, perhaps, of perhaps living in a singular place in space and time, and just having to deal with the demons and ghosts that come through it all. But like, I think it's what drew me in so quickly with this album, how effectively the nature of the music expressed that image. And considering the vague references to ghosts as well, like, it does feel like this sort of distinct reflection of something existentially overwhelming. The seeing of strange apparitions, the navigation of miserable memory. I don't know why, but it's something I really get on with what the album's offering, and I think it's fast approaching to be one of my favourite albums. Something that I just seem to be listening to a lot, and something I am now very excited to see what's coming, later this year, actually, truth be told. What is next for Planning for Burial? So yeah, I think with that, we should just try come to the end of our episode of Weird Music. I think this one's kind of gone a bit beyond me and a bit away from me, but yeah, it's something I just wanted to try review, and I'm glad I kind of was able to write down some thoughts, but oh, my goodness, such a bleak album. Definitely one for the Devastating Albums playlist. But yeah, like mentioned, this has just been on rotation a lot recently, at least since the writing of this review. I think we'll see how much I'm listening to this when I've edited the video and when I've released it, but regardless, cool stuff. And I'm very glad to be talking about a very cool artist who's still making music currently. So yeah, covering more stuff from the Flenser, like brilliant label, as we can tell, right? Maybe we'll cover more of their albums in future. To be fair, I have been wanting to dive back into Have a Nice Life for quite a while. We'll see if we get around to that, but yeah, it could be worth trying to discover some of the other artists from the label as well, but we will see. Anyway, I do hope you've enjoyed watching this episode of Weird Music, though. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be everybody's thing, but it's something I like and something that I wanted to talk about because I like talking about the stuff that I'm currently getting into, if that makes sense. Part of the navigation of my journey through music discovery. So yeah, I wish you all the best. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.